welcome to Block TV. Hot on the heels of yesterday's announcement of a major partnership in the enterprise blockchain industry that saw ConsenSys team up with the likes of Ernst & Young and Microsoft, we're very happy to be joined from North Carolina, no less, by John Wolpert, Group Executive Enterprise Mainnet at ConsenSys. John, firstly, hello to you. Thank you for joining us.
It's good to see you. Thanks for having us on.
It's wonderful to have you. And before we just basically jump into the story that is, you're in North Carolina. I'm wondering with you, because it seems to be the narrative of the day, how freaked out are you about the coronavirus?
Oh my! Well, I had pneumonia a couple of years ago. I had some consequences with my lungs, so I try to stay away from that. And heart goes out to anybody that's affected by it.
Entirely so, and I think it's affecting the entire world, but obviously also the markets. That said, it has not stopped ConsenSys. So congratulations on the new venture. How long was this in the planning, and what does it mean for ConsenSys?
Oh boy! So well, the actual work started in a chance meeting with my, in a way, predecessor at IBM, who went to Ernst & Young, Paul Brody. In a very chance encounter, we wound up on stage together at Ethereal last year. Wasn't supposed to happen. Somebody kind of made it happen in the last minute. And we really hit it off. And a week later, he's like, we got to do something. And this guy really is an action-oriented executive at Ernst & Young, Paul Brody. Right. And suddenly our teams are working night and day, really hard. And I have to say, in 30 years of working across companies, I mean, it's been my lot in life to try to forge alliances between companies. I've been doing that a lot of years. I have never seen a set of companies come together and work as harmoniously as we have.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and what you're describing is actually one of the, the wet dreams, one can argue, in the business and enterprise world, where two people actually meet, be it in a conference, which nowadays seems less than likely, but meet in a conference, hit it off, and start a venture that actually is leading someplace. What will this? Yeah, go ahead.
He was the IBM, he was the leader of when nobody knew how to spell blockchain. Paul Brody was out on the pioneering blockchain trail at IBM before he moved to Ernst & Young. And then we came along later.
And when it comes to blockchain, because you're clearly deep in it, when was your eureka moment?
Well, in 2015, my old boss at IBM, Jerry Cuomo, wonderful guy, I was working at Watson, and he famously said, I've told this story a lot, he said, he called up and said, hey, Lewis, it's Clark. There's this thing called blockchain. We got to go figure it out. And I'm like, well, give me a shipping crew, and I'll go look at it. And he said, well, I got 2 muskets, a dog, and a canoe. And we just, shortly thereafter, everybody was talking about blockchain. We got lucky.
You got lucky, and you're moving it ahead. I love the Lewis and Clark. I want to go back to the partnership. Take me through what it means. What is it going to do, both for the businesses involved? What is the aim with it?
All right. So the point. So in 2015, if I go back to that,
please,
we were all excited about blockchain. Blockchain was this new hotness, and we were like, well, okay, so how can we make this work in enterprise? We were at IBM, and we built, Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric. We started the Hyperledger open source organization. I worked a lot on that, and I was the head of products for the whole thing for IBM. And but in the back of my mind, we used to say that we were like, this private blockchain idea, it has some things that worry me a little bit in terms of, are we just building sort of a fancy database, a shared database, if you will? And I think sometimes I still think that you could call private blockchain, a shared database and be a shared state machine and be more accurate. You would have less baggage on the term.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with it. There's lots of places where you need a shared state machine.
It's not a dirty
But
world.
every time you create one, you create a new silo. And as I got thinking about that over the years, and as I moved over to ConsenSys with Joe Lubin, and the story there is simply, who could say no to Joe Lubin when he calls, right? And even when I told Jerry Cuomo, hey, Joe Lubin called, he goes, you got to take that. You don't not say no to Joe. And it's been really great. And so even coming over here to Ethereum, this notion of these extra silos kind of was always on my mind. And there's some great technologies out there. Corda is good, Fabric's good, private blockchain, nothing wrong with it. But when you look right down at it, we're forgetting in our excitement about blockchain, we're forgetting about things like traditional state machines, SAP, ERP, CRM, SCM, all of these, Oracle. I mean, I cut my teeth in the 90s on, relational databases. They were the new thing. And we have to bring all that together. They're all basically state machines. And what we need, if we want to work together across company lines, is a common frame of reference. And that stuck in my head, stuck in all of our heads. We need a common frame of reference. Very simply, very boring idea. If you have two machines, especially two machines run by two different organizations or companies entirely, right, you need a common frame of reference to keep them in sync. I need to know that my record is the same as your record. And one way to do that is to put it on a common blockchain or a shared state machine, right? And say, I'm going to take this data, and we're going to move it over here to this shared place, and we're going to make that the single source of truth. Well, that's one way to do it. But the downside of that is you've now moved your potentially very sensitive company information, personal information, or just strategically sensitive information. And like 80% of company information could be considered sensitive, if your competitors got a hold of it, right? So, and this is maybe one of the fallacies I worry about when people don't understand blockchain too much and they get excited about it, is I think they think of it as a more safe database. I'm like, no, it's maybe more tamper resistant slightly.
Right.
But it's not safe against breaches of data. It's a lot less safe. I mean, if you have a 100-company consortium and each one has a node, the worst admin in that consortium is going to make you all when they get hacked by Mr. Robot.
Yep.
Right. So moving the data out of your traditional system, which you're doing everything you can to protect already, into a shared database or a shared state machine is
scary.
It is a good idea for lots of things, but not everything. And even so, even if you do that, what happens when you run into something else that you need to integrate that isn't in that shared state machine, right? You're setting up a supply chain workflow with a Fabric blockchain, and somebody else is working on something similar with a Corda DLT, and now you've run into each other after the fact, and now you have to stare each other down and figure out which one is whose blockchain is going to win. Or you have to figure out yet another silo to make those two things integrate, and on it goes. So at the end of the day, the internet said, hey, in the early days of the internet, it was, hey, this is a really, really inefficient way to move packets around, to move data around. TCP/IP, very inefficient, but it's repeatable, it's always on, it's kind of a public good. We're taking the profit motive out of that low-level service. Well, what if, in addition to all the other things that public blockchains like Ethereum are, what if what if that mainnet capital M, is the internet capital I's state machine for keeping? It's the last silo, the last common frame of reference for other state machines that need to coordinate. And it's a public good, and aside from a little bit of gas, which really doesn't, is not the expensive part of running activities on public blockchain, you have a very, you don't have to do it up. It's already up. You don't have to spend capital expense to do it. It's just there, and you can pay as you go, and nobody can lock you out. It's a public good, and we've removed the direct profit motive from it. So that hopefully, once we mature that, it becomes, there's no point in having more than one of those at that level. It's not a very fancy level. It's a really low level, boring job. Keep other things coordinated.
But usually
somebody's got to do it. Otherwise, you have more silos, more balkanization.
Now, you guys managed to get, and you mentioned that at the beginning, the big names like Ernst & Young, Microsoft is collaborating on this. Who are you gunning for, though, when it comes to ConsenSys? Other companies, big names interested?
In terms of the companies that are joining
the initiative.
Yeah, so the baseline protocol initiative is kind of the culmination of all this thinking. And Ernst & Young did a lot of thinking about other components. And I should say before I go into that, there's nothing, we've been saying that the Mainnet 2020 or the baseline protocol is embrace the boring. This is a set of boring, well-known, well-understood Legos put together in a certain way with a certain insight that says, hey, we have this always on state machine. Why don't we use it as a bulletin board to coordinate systems, right? It's as simple as that. Nothing to see here. But there are some important technologies that make that even better. And ZK Snarks is one of them, and Ernst & Young has done a lot of research on that, zero knowledge techniques. So we all have something to bring. And 14 companies came out on the press release, some great names. And what's notable is even more great names weren't on that press release and are preparing to be involved in the community.
Such as?
That's for them to say when they're ready. And the code will be released this month. So we've announced just like we did with Hyperledger back in 2015. We've announced the existence of the initiative. And that's generating, a very notable name, which I wish I could say, called, out of the blue, just said, we saw the report, how, can we have a meeting tomorrow, right? So that we're getting that kind of action right now. And yeah, I think we're seeing the end of corporations considering the mainnet, the public mainnet, verboten. They're like, oh, that makes sense.
Really?
We want in.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're not moving your data to the public blockchain. You're not running your business logic on the public blockchain. You're just using it as middleware. And you can do that. What we're showing is you can do that in a way that doesn't give up any strategic intel. I can't point an AI at the mainnet or to the ledger and figure out your patterns of behavior or your relationships. It just looks like sameness. If I was an AI listening to the ledger, it would sound like a metronome. Tick, tick, tick. There's no information loss. So yeah, when you put actual, data and you start doing the way we tokenized things up until now, you can analyze a lot of stuff that's going on, and you have this custodian problem. There's you have a token on the mainnet, right? And so custodianship and finality, all these things become an issue. But if the token of if the thing that you're really trading, if the thing that you have value is sitting in your database, and what you've done with the mainnet is say my counterparty is verifiably having this same data, has the same data, and handles the transformation of that data in the same way.
Right.
And the only thing the mainnet is doing is saying, yep, you guys are consistent. Right. Then I can have the benefits of tokenization without being out there in the open for everybody to see what my business activities
and exposed
are.
and endangered. It sounds, you kept describing it as boring. FYI, it's not. It's actually one of the first steps to progress that, especially I think when it comes, as you described, to enterprise businesses. And in that respect,
after 5 years of hype, and I have some responsibility for this, I was part of that hype.
Really?
After 5 years of hype, boring is exciting.
Some would argue that, well, I don't know, I'm at the age where anything boring is very exciting to me. But that said, John, I want to ask you, because you said you joined ConsenSys in 2015, right?
I joined the IBM blockchain team. Well, we formed it. There was like 6 or 8 of us in a room in San Francisco in a basement somewhere. And then, several years later, after launching Hyperledger, I moved over to ConsenSys because who wouldn't? I mean,
because Joe Lubin called, and I completely agree. I'm still waiting for him to call me. That's a joke. But that said, ConsenSys, first of all, it has people like you who, by the way, are doing a masterful job in explaining very difficult tech issues to a greater public, as you just did. So kudos on that. But it's making great strides into the mainstream. Only over the course of the last several months, we saw the collaboration with JP Morgan and the Quorum Unit. Now this press release, and it's doing it in, what I would describe as kind of a step-by-step, very diligent process. What would you say is the main goal at the end of it all?
That's a tough question for me to answer from where I sit. I mean, there's a lot going on, but in a way, there's less going on than there was before. This is the time for getting stuff done. We were in a time of exploration, and what a fun time that was. In the last 5 years, a Cambrian explosion, I think is what somebody called it, of ideas, and some of them worked and some of them didn't.
Right.
And at some point, you have enough grist for the mill that you say, okay, now the work to refine and productize and get boring happens, right? When I joined, I was an IBMer 3 times in my career, and I started in '97 in IBM on the Java team. And a few years after Java, I asked my boss, I was like, can I go over and run this other thing that was called AlphaWorks? And he said, why? Java, it's the hotness. It's the amazing thing. And I said, yeah, I figure in a year, it's either going to be boring because it's successful or it's a failure. And it was successful, but I was right. It was boring. It was just part of the infrastructure. And that was a success, right? Nobody has a Java marketing team today, but we had big ones in 1997. You don't have a C++ marketing team or a Fortran marketing team or anything like that. You don't have a UDP marketing team. Well, at some point, we're not going to need blockchain marketing teams, right? Sure. We're just going to say, yeah, it's part of it's on the workbench. We use it a good work person will use the tool for the right job in the right place, and others will use it in the wrong place in the wrong time, make a mess, and that's the way it works.
Yeah, but
so I would say that we're on the way now, finally, to past the hype cycle and into the utility cycle.
Amen to that. I think that's the right road to mass adoption. Some would argue. John Wolpert, Group Executive Enterprise Mainnet ConsenSys, joining me from North Carolina today. I cannot thank you enough. This was fascinating, and once again, congratulations to you and ConsenSys and the entire team for this yet again another development.
Let me plug. Go to baseline-protocol.org and sign up to be part of the movement. Thanks a lot.
What he said. There you go. Thank you. We were BLOCKTV.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.